The world has a long list of things to thank Japan for. Godzilla,
Your face had kaiju.
as these dinosaurs were by no means kawaii.
We are not dinosaurs! Why does he have a pineapple in his eye? I swear, Americans will measure it with everything but the metrics. His head is bigger than his body. Wait, so they basically had katana teeth? Anime didn't lie to me. Yeah! It's an Nata! Doofenshmirtz would be proud. That man's built like a tank. What is this, Zoids? That's not how you spell tsundere. Japan didn't have kaiju. Your face had kaiju.
The world has a long list of things to thank Japan for. Sushi, anime, giant mecha robots, and of course their most famous animal, who happens to be fictional, or so I hope. Godzilla, that lovable giant Kamehameha breathing monster that's being an
Look, I talked to Godzilla. They apologized. But Japan pissed them off. Okay? Now forget about it. We're not... We look like me all the time. Yes. Cute and cuddly. Don't send Chuck Norris, okay, please?
integral part to pop culture since 1954. And as you've probably noticed by now, Godzilla bears some resemblance to dinosaurs, and that isn't coincidental, with it
We are not dinosaurs!
actually having taken inspiration from not only the Tyrannosaurus, but also the Stegosaurus and the Iguanodon, which is rather ironic considering that none of these dinosaurs ever stepped foot in Japan, as far as we know. But there were others that made it to Japan, and during the Cretaceous period, it was actually quite the dinosaur's paradise, or rather nightmare for anyone trying to stay in one piece, as these dinosaurs were by no means kawaii. And what was really strange about it all was that Japan was home to a bunch of dinosaurs you'd never expect to find together in one place,
I'll never admit
making for some pretty strange pairings. And let's just say there were a lot of these bizarre matchups, and it almost seems like Japan was collecting dinosaurs like Pokemon, leading to the question of how, seeing that today Japan is a rather isolated country, with most of its land being about 124 miles or 200 kilometers away from mainland Asia. However, a long time ago, it wasn't so isolated, and wasn't even an island, instead being stuck snugly to China, at least for some of the time, as Japan has taken on some odd shapes during its existence. And depending on the sea level plus tectonic activity, it was at times an archipelago, a strip of land, and even a peninsula. But whatever the case, it sure seemed to have been a bountiful area, as life could be found en masse in every nook and cranny. And along with having an expansive shoreline, the heightened volcanic activity may have been what gave Japan such fertile grounds back in the day. And even today, the country remains quite volcanic, courtesy of the Ring of Fire. But besides this, the similarities between past and present end. And this extends to weather too, as back then, Japan had a much more chaotic climate that seemed to switch back and forth between cold and dry and warm and humid. This
Poor Cretaceous Japan. '07s to old Cretaceous Japan weather.
difference would have easily been felt in the air, and was also reflected by the forests, which at the time didn't have as many of the iconic sakura trees, but instead cycads, cypresses, fruit-bearing trees, and ferns. The inhabitants were also of course quite different, and while life was abundant throughout the Cretaceous, fossil formations show that it was really during the early Cretaceous that life popped off. And it seems that dinosaurs of nearly every kind wanted a piece of the land of the rising sun, with the diversity being frankly mind-boggling. And some of the residents included kinds you would definitely not expect to find in Japan, of all places, including what was potentially the largest predator in the country at the time, the Spinosaurid. When you hear this, you probably
Spinosaurus is awesome.
first think of the Spinosaurus, who resided in Africa, or maybe the Baryonyx, which was found in Europe. And yet, Spinosaurs did find their way into Asia as well. It might have even You probably first think of the Spinosaurus, who resided in Africa, or maybe the Baryonyx, which was found in Europe. And yet, Spinosaurs did
It's the same thing! You're saying Spinosaurus and Spinosaurus. Sir!
Find their way into Asia as well. It might have even first evolved there. Go figure. But they weren't widespread in the continent, and definitely was rather an anomaly within Japan, as so far, the only evidence we have of their presence is 2 sets of teeth. Now, you'd be right to question how you'd get to assume an entire Spino from teeth alone. But actually, Spinosaur teeth are extremely distinctive and possess multiple autapomorphies, which is basically traits that are only found in one taxon. Therefore, we know for sure it was a Spinosaurid, and likely a medium to large one at that, considering that the teeth were comparable to the Baryonyxes in size. And estimates suggest that the Japanese Spino may have been hypothetically between 7.5 and 10 meters, or 25 and 33 feet long, and possibly over 2 tons at a maximum, which is more than 4 times heavier than your typical male polar bear. Though I will say keep in mind that telling size
Then pick something that's heavier!
purely from teeth is rather hard.
I swear, Americans will measure with everything but the metric system.
And while Baryonyx was maybe its twin in size, its teeth were overall much more like that of Siamosaurus, a fellow Asian Spinosaurid to which paleontologists think it shared a very similar lifestyle with, which let's just say is terrible news for all, as Siamosaurus was deceptively bloodthirsty. Certain adaptations like conical teeth and a croc-like snout pointed to a life spent near or in water for
You bet water skiing was no joke back then? Arguably, the ocean was scarier back then than it is now. Because it had gigantics that would just swallow, like, buildings whole.
for long periods, where fish would have been its main prey, and isotopic analysis backs this. However, the Siamosaurus has also been associated with sauropods. Specifically, paleontologists found sauropod remains on their teeth, which is pretty strong evidence that it at least indulged in a sauropod every once in a while. Now, it is possible that this was just some scavenging event, but the frequency is to a point where some suggest active predation, and while its teeth were not enough to do anything, it definitely could have used its large sharp claws to inflict serious damage, raking massive amounts of flesh off, or piercing deep into vulnerable areas. And while we do know from other Spinosaurids that fish were numero uno, dinosaurs and pterosaurs were occasionally eaten too. Because of this, researchers think that our mysterious Spinosaurid was actually an apex predator given its size, holding domain over any water sources like lakes, rivers, and streams, as well as the surrounding lands. And in a sense, this scenario is quite likely, as it was even bigger than the Siamosaurus, while the sauropods it lived with were smaller, with the 2 main ones having been the Fukui titan and Tamba titanus. Both of these sauropods had a strong preference for Lower Japan, and they were also both members of the Titanosaur family, which are notable for their large sizes. Yet despite this, and the fact that each had Titan in their name, they were quite small for their family, with some estimates painting them as no more than 10 meters or 33 feet. So that makes them shorter than a T-Rex, which is by no means small, but these were sauropods we're talking about. And in the weight department, they didn't do much better, hovering around a maximum of 5 tons. Now I will mention, there's a chance that Fukui Titan was a bit bigger, at possibly 16 meters or 52 feet.
Down with the
But
metric
ultimately,
system, this
these
is
were not
America.
supersized sauropods, which was bad news for Littlefoot, and juveniles in particular would have had a rough time, especially considering that Japan
Doncoliosis?
had a stupid amount of predators. And some weren't what you'd expect to see alongside a Spino. Or maybe you would if you had watched Jurassic Park growing up, because I am talking about a Tyrannosaur. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I should clarify that it wasn't really a member of the Tyrannosauridae family, but instead a member of the Tyrannosauroidea superfamily, and thus making it a primitive ancestor or cousin to the T-Rex. For now, this Tyrannosauroid has gone unnamed just like the Spino, and we only know it by its teeth. Seeing a trend? But unlike the Spino, this guy was definitely specialized in taking out dinosaurs all the time, having teeth designed to puncture, crush, and cut into big-bodied prey like sauropods, hadrosaurs, and so on. And let's just say in a fight between it and the Spino, I know who I'd put my money on, especially when considering that this Tyrannosauroid was also unusually large for a basal member. In fact, its teeth were big enough that paleontologists had to rethink the whole timeline of when the Rex's ancestors started to get big. And for now it's thought that the much later Appalachiosaurus was closest to it in stature, meaning a potentially 6.5 meter or 21 foot long tyrannosauroid roaming about, that also, given its primitiveness, may have had long, powerful arms and sharp claws too, that made it just slightly more versatile. And it definitely seems like Cretaceous
Which confuses me because normally in evolution you keep advantageous things. So like, why did its arms get shorter?
Japan had a soft spot for predators with scary arms, because this was a Three Musketeers situation for large theropods, being the Spinosaurid, Tyrannosauroid, and then to finish it off, the Fukuiraptor, a type of Megaraptoran. This group, as you probably know by now, were all arms and claws, having giant forelimbs that were equipped with 2 massive claws, which were recurved and razor sharp. And the Fukuiraptor was no exception to this. These weapons allowed it to both pin prey
Well, it's got a nice view, I suppose.
and also shred them to pieces, while at the same time being able to maneuver them like Play-Doh, as they were hypermobile,
Is he gone now?
allowing it to literally skewer and lift victims up to its mouth, where absolutely horrifying teeth awaited. Now, all Megaraptorans had pretty nasty teeth, but there were levels to it, as they were an extremely diverse bunch, and the Fukuiraptor happened to have just about the scariest, as its teeth was basically a hybrid, sharing traits typically seen in Carcharodontosaurids and Tyrannosaurids, which are 2 groups explicitly known for having some messed up teeth. From the Carcharodontosaurids, it took their trademark compression, with each tooth being very flat, serrated, and blade-like, while also sporting wrinkled enamels.
Have a good
Then
day,
from the
Leaf.
Tyrannosauridae, it had oblique blood grooves near its serrations, and it goes without saying that anything called blood grooves cannot be good. And it wasn't, as these were essentially etched out areas on the teeth that allowed blood to flow around them and out of a victim.
Wait, so they basically had katana teeth? Anime didn't lie to me.
While biting down, essentially serving to speed up any blood loss. Additionally, the design helped the Fukuiraptor bite like a madman, as they prevented the teeth from suctioning and sticking into the prey, kind of like how an axe might get stuck in wood. And so without this problem, it was able to bite rapidly while causing major blood loss, which on top of its claws led to a swift death, or at least hopefully. What's more is that even for a Megaraptor, this creature was quite quick-footed, being light as a feather for its size, as it measured 5 meters, or 16 feet, but only weighed 300 kilograms, or 660 pounds, so less than the average seen in certain grizzly bear populations. And this lack of heft was due to its hollow and slender bones, which granted it abnormal speed, meaning that nothing was outrunning it. And that goes for any time travelers too, which is terrible news considering the way it killed. And what's worse is that the holotype, the biggest known specimen so far, was actually an immature individual. So in other words, it only got bigger. So between it and the 2 others, you can bet that herbivores were in for a rough time. And this is not even taking into account that a potentially small to medium-sized Carcharodontosaurid also set up base there. However, thanks to the richness of Cretaceous Japan, herbivores still thrived, especially the hadrosaurs, which included the likes of the teeny Koshisaurus, Fukuisaurus, and then the big one, the Kamuisaurus.
Those are the dinosaurs that stab you with their thumb, right? They go, ja! You know?
It had Montesaurini that might have rivaled the sauropods in size at its biggest. Yet it still wasn't big enough to remain out of harm's way, especially when young, and nor were the various iguanodontids that hadrosaurs coexisted with. But perhaps size wasn't the key to staying safe here, and others did take alternative steps, as best demonstrated by another animal that we also know from its teeth, but also tracks this time too, which both point to the fact that ankylosaurs were plentiful at the time as well. Now, with just teeth and tracks to go off of, it's hard to say what kind of armor they were rocking, or if they had a tail club, but being surrounded by so many carnivores might have led to some additional pressure of developing quite a defense. And it wasn't just ornithischians or sauropods who dealt with pesky predators, but other theropods too, as Japan just kept pumping them out. And again, I'm telling you, there was something with the claws, as the 2 prominent kinds here were the Therizinosaurs and Dinochiridae, 2 groups known for strange manicures. Now, they were all arguably very
Strange
weird.
manicures?
However, the ones in Japan broke rules
Oh, are these the guys that had the thumb stabby?
typically seen even in those families, at least in the case of the Japanese Dinochiridae Tyrannomimus, meaning tyrant mimic. Unlike its most famous relative,
Mimic. My PTSD is activating.
relative, the Deinocheirus, this genus was not giant, instead being about the size of a human. But the real important difference is that while
About the size of a human shows clearly smaller than it.
paleontologists think that the large claws of Deinocheirus were mainly used to dig up and grab vegetation, in Tyrannomimus, they might have played a more sinister purpose. You see, in many Deinocheiridae, the claws are recurved, yet blunt. Meanwhile, in the Tyrannomimus, they were actually sharp, suggesting that they were used for predatory reasons on top of vegetation gathering. An esthetician further backs this, as while they were adapted mainly for a herbivorous diet, some of the teeth still had characteristics you'd expect to find in an omnivore, leading to the idea that it mainly ate plants, but would use its claws and teeth for an occasional meaty snack, such as invertebrates or small vertebrates. And while not as voracious, you can't forget about the therizinosaurs, who seem to be even more plentiful, with paleontologists being aware of 3 different kinds, though only one is named, and actually didn't live during the early Cretaceous, while the other 2 have gone undescribed, and are only known from fragmentary remains. And because of this, we are unsure of just how big they were, and if they reached the giant sizes seen in the iconic Therizinosaurus. But based on the named small one, the Paralotherizinosaurus, we can assume that they were likely on the smaller size. Now that being said, their claws were still quite big and nasty. I mean, after all, the family is known for having the longest claws ever seen in any group of animals. And in their case, paleontologists reckon that they were mainly used to dig or hook and pull flora. And while not confirmed, it's likely that they were also used for mating displays, intimidation, and what seems to be obvious, self-defense. But this is actually still a debated topic. Reason being that some argue that their claws were too flimsy to do any meaningful damage due to their brittleness.
They don't look brittle in every way you show them.
And then others say that while they could be used, they could not be used to slash, and instead were only good as stabby weapons, with one study finding that the claws showed maximum strain resistance during stabbing motions. So who knows, maybe the Megaraptorans had some competition. And actually, there was one more Therizinosaur that I did not include in the counting initially, mainly because we weren't certain that it was one, and if you ran into it, you'd likely first think that it was some sort of Dromaeosaur. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the Fukuivenator, a dog-sized dinosaur.
It's an Enata! Doofenshmirtz would be proud.
Who as of 2021 is apparently not only a Therizinosaur, but actually the very first one. From the outside, it looked more like raptors, with the similarities to Dromaeosaurs being chalked up to convergent evolution, though its claws did take more after its later relatives. But it was still an anomaly, having what I call a non-friendly build, as meat was still on this primitive creature's menu. And along with sharper claws than most, you noticed that it had pointed and recurved teeth too. But if we take a good look at them, we'll see that it was actually already on the way to its pacifistic lifestyle, as some of its teeth lacked serrations and flattened out at the ends, while others were completely spatula-shaped, which in addition to a long neck, implied a diet made up of large amounts of plant matter with small vertebrates and insects sprinkled in. And for those little critters, their woes did not end with the Fukuivenator, as Japan had a plentiful amount of small ninjas too, or so you could say, which
He did that just so you could put Naruto in there.
included the troodontid Hypnovenator, the avialan dinosaur Fukuipteryx, and a not so little undescribed Dromaeosaur, who might have actually been the same size as
All I gotta say is, man, Bert's got the like a short stick on evolution.
Jurassic Park velociraptors. So in other words, you better bet some
They
larger
went
animals
from
would have been
top
on
of
the
the
menu
food
as well.
chain
And
to
all of these theropods seem to show a heavy
different food
preference
chain
for
entirely,
dense forests that were situated
lower
inland,
end.
while also frequenting freshwater sources like rivers. And while many non-dinosaurs made up their prey, these smaller predators were likely advocates of feasting on the Albalophosaurus and Caesia magnimus as well. 2 bizarre yet oddly cute ornithischians that were abundant in Japan. And to me, are strong cases for why we should definitely bring back dinosaurs, at least some of them.
If I hear about a lot of people dying to a T-Rex later on, I'm not going to be surprised. I'll be honest, I'll be quite amused, actually.
So clearly, early Cretaceous
No, I'm not a psychopath!
Japan had a dinosaur infestation. But in reality, it was actually more of an infestation of life, not necessarily dinosaurs. as virtually every group was thriving here.
Why does that guy have a leopard tail? No, he has a leopard body and a... Is it a cheetah tail? What are some of these design choices? Why is there a toucan pterodactyl? Wait, were beavers alive during the
And you
Tyrannosaurus period?
an area where something wasn't on the floor, stuck to a tree, or swimming in the water. And this included a bunch of freshwater and land-based turtles, dozens of species of frogs and toads, and many, many bugs. And in reality, if you're not a fan of insects, arachnids, and other small invertebrates, then Cretaceous Japan was not the place for you, and that's putting it mildly. Some regions, mainly swamps, were so bad that they basically rivaled the Carboniferous, and the quote-unquote creepy vertebrate lineup was no less intense. For starters, you had the classics, like lizards and snakes, which ranged in size and diet. And then you also had lizards that looked like snakes, aka legless lizards, which weren't dangerous, but could definitely give someone quite the jump. Next, you had the more exotic and now extinct creatures, which made the swamps a bit more questionable. Chief among them were a few kinds of Christoderes that varied quite a bit in size and niche, with skull materials showing that some had snouts very much similar to gharials, suggesting a fish-heavy diet, and others possessing shorter and more robust jaws, like those seen in alligators, which would have implied a more broad and hostile diet to human-sized animals. And while these guys looked a lot like crocs, that was all thanks to convergent evolution. And a couple of them might have lived quite a bit differently too, because despite most being semi-aquatic, these guys in a few cases could become fully aquatic, spending essentially their entire lives in water. And though they weren't crocs, you did actually have real crocs too, or rather crocodilians. Namely, the Goniopholideidae, an extinct family of moderate-sized bodied Neosuchians with extensive armor both on their backs and stomachs, making them pretty darn.
That man's built like a tank. What is this, Zoids?
Tanky. And to go along with their defense, they also had a mean old mouth that could deliver crushing bites to basically anything that fit. Additionally, they were probably ambush predators who lied in wait for anything to wander too close to the water's edge. And though not nearly as deadly or large, other creepish animals that called the swamps home included the Kaganeas, Monjurosuchus, Shokawa, and various extinct salamanders. And of course, in swamps and freshwater areas, there are plenty of fish too. But surprisingly, none of them seem to be that large or predatorial. But they did, however, attract an absolute plethora of pterosaurs, with the three major groups being Tenocasmatidae, Sungaripteridae, and Ornithocheiroidae. Three major groups being Tenocasmatidae,
That's not how you spell tsundere.
Sungaripteridae, and Ornithocheiroidae. Again, like the fish, these pterosaurs were not necessarily all that lethal towards large animals, but their appearances could sometimes be a bit off-putting, and they, along with the alarming amount of dinosaurs running rampant, might make you feel rather compelled to panic and try to flee the land, perhaps towards the sea. I mean, after all, there are no dinosaurs there. And this would actually not be the worst possible
You would be wrong. You would die.
option, as breaking a bit from the trend, early Cretaceous Japan had some pretty chill waters, relatively speaking. At the time, the watery king was probably some kind of pliosaur, given their abundance worldwide. And you could also likely expect to find a handful of plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and sharks. But I will say that all of them seem to be rather rare in those days, which is likely due to one of Earth's forgotten extinction events, the Aptian extinction. Ironically, while volcanic eruptions may have been the source of Japan's diversity of life on land due to the fertile soils it created, it was actually also volcanic eruptions that wreaked havoc in the waters and caused this extinction event. Except that this wasn't caused by the Japanese volcanoes, but rather the Raj Mahal traps in India. Marine life everywhere was impacted by this event, and even the land got a bit scorched too, as it's thought that mammals' last surviving relatives, the Tritylodonts, got erased during this event, as well as unfortunately the very last stegosaur, which is likely why none were known in Japan at the time. And so overall, because of the effect that this had on marine life, groups like the plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs were in very bad straits, which led to the water of Japan being relatively peaceful. But I'd be careful to not let this get to your head, because the waters would not remain swimmable forever. And within a few million years, they'd go from chill to a complete poop show that made the land seem tame. This switch up essentially occurred as the early Cretaceous developed into the late one, and it was marked by a Pacific Ocean that was much warmer and higher than today, with waters being over 100 meters more elevated, and also resulting in the ocean constituting 10% more of the Earth's total water than it does now, which also means a lot more space for nightmares. And perhaps thanks to the extinction event, it was no longer the pliosaurs who were the main problems, but instead mosasaurs, who were also new to the world, and let's just say, they didn't waste any time taking over Japan's waters. And within a short period, there were suddenly lots of them. In fact, not only did Japan have an abnormal amount, but they also seemed to be much more assertive here.
All I'm saying is I highly doubt any, time travel goes back there. There's just too many things that can and probably will kill you.
Here than in other places, as non-mosasaur predators were fairly rare, which also makes this about one of the only times where no sharks was actually a bad thing. Of the bunch, the most troublesome and widespread was the infamous Mosasaurus, who, while being best known for inhabiting the western interior seaway, was doing just fine here too. Though the Japanese species was not the Hoffmanni, but instead the relatively unknown Obetsuensis, which was still one of the largest members of the entire order, measuring up to 12 meters or 40 feet long, and thus ensuring its apex predator status. Just like its relatives, it had powerful jaws adorned with numerous large and robust. Just like its relatives, long, and thus the largest members of the entire order, measuring up to 12.
Okay, I was about to say, a lot of these little measuring sticks. No, that's still wrong. Doesn't even look close to her being even 6 of that. So that person's probably 4 feet? Maybe? And why is she in the middle of the crap? Why isn't she higher up so you can actually measure with her?
Meters or 40 feet long, and thus ensuring its apex predator status. Just like its relatives, it had powerful jaws adorned with numerous large and robust teeth that were well designed for cutting through large amounts of flesh, so virtually anything was on the menu. And based on remains, this possibly included a variety of turtles, some of which could be quite large, big fish, birds, other marine reptiles, and possibly even dinosaurs, as carcasses were known to float out to open waters every once in a while. Additionally, even other mosasaurs were probably snacks too, as the genus was highly aggressive, and attack marks have been found on specific specimens. And so obviously, any large animals would probably want to stay well and far away from this predator. But the main issue was that it wasn't just megafauna that were on Mosasaur's radar, as here there were different genera specializing in different prey, making the waters safe for no one. For starters, you had the medium-sized Tannuosaurus, a tylosaurine, that at its max was about 29 feet or 8.5 meters, give or take.
I swear, some of these dinosaur names just sound made up.
And was more specialized in slightly smaller animals than Mosasaurus, having.
Is there a banana fish or something? Or a cacophonut or something?
Weaker neck muscles, but increased mobility that allowed it to hunt faster prey, as well as amazing binocular
Why did I think of banana?
vision that let it better track prey that was both agile.
Why does he have a pineapple in his eye?
And on the smaller side, but I say smaller loosely. It also differed in habitat, preferring slightly deeper waters, where it needed to worry less about getting gobbled up as well. Next, you had the Phosphorosaurus, who preferred even deeper waters and was small.
He blew fire, that's why he's called a Phosphorosaurus. I know. I'm smart.
Smaller than both previously mentioned mosasaurs, with estimates ranging from 3 to 6 meters or 10 to 19 feet. And this creature was a bit of an oddball, as unlike the vast
braved fire
majority of mosasaurs, its morphology suggested that it was a darn terrible swimmer, and thus leading to the hypothesis that it heavily relied on ambushes, utilizing the darkness of deep waters to sneak up on prey. And to aid in this bottom-dwelling life,
or high-temperature fireballs.
Phosphorosaurus also possessed very large eyes compared to the rest of its family. And then to top it all off, it had slender jaws and many small teeth to help it catch squid and bioluminescent fish, giving it a kind of similar niche to lanternfish, who still live in the area to this day. And lastly, there was the Megapterygius, a great white-sized mosasaur who was essentially the cheetah.
Its name is Wakaya Mansis. Wakaya!
of the waters. I say this because besides its nimbler stature, it also had a body plan which featured giant wing-shaped flippers, and the joints attached to them were hypermobile, resulting in it being able to do crazy maneuvers at high speed, such as braking, rapid pitch control, and crazy turns, which basically made it a biological fighter jet, or rather submarine. So even the most agile prey wouldn't have been safe, which is thought to have been mainly fish. And unsurprisingly, in these prehistoric waters, fish
We found the dolphin ancestor.
were very abundant, and it wasn't only mosasaurs that they attracted, but also flying things too, namely pterosaurs once again. And the sushi must have been good eating this time around, because these coastal pterosaurs were monsters, with the largest of the bunch being, surprise surprise, an undescribed genera, which for now is referred to simply as a pteranodonted-like pterosaur, who had a wingspan of 6.8 meters or 22 feet, which makes it not only the largest pterosaur ever found in Japan, but also in the entirety of Asia. And it was further joined by probably the most infamous family of pterosaurs out there, the Asdarchidae, specifically through the genus Nipponopterus. This pterosaur lived in southern Japan, and like its relatives, had a giant skull and relatively large body, boasting a wingspan of nearly 12 feet or 3.6 meters. However, given the proportions of Asdarchids, it's almost guaranteed that while walking, it would have been even larger than the undescribed pterosaur, likely standing taller than your shoulders. And though it lived in coastal areas, its design does suggest that terrestrial prey were a larger part of its diet than in most pterosaurs, as it had a proportionally giant neck and beak. Though I will say, it probably wouldn't have
Its head is almost as big as its body.
passed up on the opportunity of fish if it presented itself. And joining the pterosaurs in their love of Nemo were birds, like the Chupca ornis, a flightless bird that specialized solely in fishing, having webbed feet that granted it an impressive ability to dive down, with some remains even being found in areas associated with water depths of up to 80 meters or 260 feet. Now their presence here would have made it a requirement that they stay alert at all times, given the presence of not only mosasaurs, but also pliosaurs, which therefore means that for a brief period, Japan was one of the few areas where you could see pliosaurs and mosasaurs compete against each other, and perhaps even fight, which would have definitely been quite the sight. And if you think the danger ends here, you'd be mistaken, as another new addition to the area were krakens, or rather giant cephalopods, namely the Harbortoothus and Yezotoothus. These guys only showed up some 80 or so million years ago, thus they probably didn't live with the pliosaurs, but with mosasaurs they definitely did, and would have actually put up surprising defenses considering that both were equal or greater in size than the colossal and giant squids, but also had more lethal beaks, which seemed to be better adapted for hunting larger animals. What's more is that unlike our modern day giants that are quite shy, these two spend a lot of time in coastal waters, meaning that any swim would be questionable at best. And the chaotic nature of Japan and the waters seemed to remain until the very last days of the Cretaceous, which then of course received the untimely KT extinction event that ended up erasing most of the animals that made the lands quite, questionable. But hey,
Quite.
at least now we have sushi and anime.
Quite questionable. Quite questionable. Quite questionable. I want to look at this again. Where is it? That's a hug I wouldn't want to have. Where is it though? No.
Though I will say, it probably wouldn't have as it had a
His head is bigger than his body. My man. Also, why does he look like he has like human legs? That was ExtinctZoo. It was pretty good. I learned a lot today. I also learned that there's a wakaya bird. And that will forever be in my brain.